Hi, this is Juja from I Heal with Love, and I'm just coming to you with a little report and talk to you about the difference between shock trauma, complex trauma, and developmental trauma in childhood. So, shock trauma is something temporal. For example, an earthquake, a car accident, a bear attack. In shock trauma, the underlying emotion is always fear. In the other hand, complex trauma is repeated trauma or loss where disruption to one's sense of self is the consequence. Under the umbrella of complex trauma is developmental complex trauma, which means during childhood within the child's environment or important relationships. For example, death or loss of a parent, verbal, physical, sexual abuse, substance abuse or mental illness in the family, emotional or physical neglect, domestic violence. When children do not get their needs met, they do not learn to recognize what they need, are unable to express their needs, and often feel undeserving of having their needs met. And then they grow up and they carry these ideas and functionings into adulthood. The emotional development is affected by different coping mechanism style adaptations depending on the age and the trauma the child was experiencing. In this case, the neurodevelopmental and the psychobiological process of shaping one's personality and therefore later in their life experience are affected. Everything that you perceive as being quote unquote wrong with you is just a surviving adaptation style to development trauma and needs to be addressed way differently than a shock trauma. Underlying emotions vary, but mostly is shame, guilt, powerlessness, hopelessness, rejection. The one thing in common is in these adaptation style is disconnection. Disconnection from one's core needs. And what are core needs of a child? A child needs connection, attunement, trust, autonomy, and love, and later on, of course, in puberty, sexuality. When the core need of connection is met, we have the capacity to be in touch with our body and our emotions, capacity to be in connection with others. The theme of the trauma experienced is, if I feel, I will fall apart or die. Or something must be wrong with me, I'd rather give up in order to stay alive. When the connection core need is not met, it means we associated connection with pain instead of safety. We learn to disconnect from physical and emotional self, therefore also difficulty relating to others. Core need of attunement is being held, dressed, fed, loved. When is met, we have capacity to attune to our needs and emotions, capacity to recognize, reach out for, and take in physical and emotional nourishment. Theme of the trauma experienced is, can I attune to my own needs or must I attune to everyone else's? And if they have their needs met, maybe, but just maybe, I will get some too. So the dynamic is sacrificing the needs of self. So when the attunement core need is not met, we have difficulty knowing what we need, feeling our needs to do not deserve to be met. And you can recognize people who have fun functioning or people-pleasing patterns. The core need of trust, when it's met, we have the capacity for healthy independence and interdependence. The dilemma is, can I trust others because there is a probable consequence of betrayal, humiliation, pain, suffering if I do? When it's not met, we have feeling we cannot depend on anyone but ourselves, feeling we have to always be in control, like if I want it done, I must do it myself. And without labeling, it's a very narcissistic, psychopathic, and control freak functioning. The core need of autonomy, when it's met, we develop the capacity to set appropriate boundaries, capacity to say no and set limits, capacity to speak our mind without guilt or fear. The theme is, if people knew me, they wouldn't love me because I was made wrong for many things. So the solution was to suppress my authentic self. So when the core need of autonomy is not met, we can feel like a burden and pressured by outside or pressuring ourselves. Difficulty setting limits and saying no. Do you have that friend who is always late? Or the one who promises to be there but then fails to appear? Okay, those are some of the ways to recognize this coping mechanism. The core need of love / sexuality. When it's met, we have the capacity to live with an open heart, capacity to integrate a loving relationship with a vital sexuality. The dynamic is, if I'm not perfect, I will be rejected. When it's not, the core need of love and / sexuality is not met, we have difficulty integrating heart and sexuality, and we link self-esteem more to looks and to performance. So this can stem for someone to become perfectionists. Again, depending the complex trauma and the age of the child when the trauma was experienced, the adaptation styles vary and are not excluded to one. Most of us have a combination of more than one or maybe even all of these adaptive strategies. And these coping mechanisms are ways to adapt to disconnection, dysregulation, and disorganization and isolation that a child experienced when their core needs were not met. And then we grew up, and what once was a solution, now it becomes a problem. And these self-sabotaging strategies or behaviors, these unconscious patterns are so deeply embedded, and we are so invested in them, even despite if we have recognized them and we want to change them, deep down in the subconscious, we might feel unworthy of it and incapable. So I invite you to a quick little exercise. So I would like you to close your eyes and bring your focus to the here and now, to your body, to your internal upcoming emotions and thoughts. So the first question I'm going to ask you is, what did you have to do in order to feel safe in your childhood and early environment? For example, did you learn to keep quiet? Did you learn to fight? Did you learn to stay away from potential conflict? Did you learn to do things to please others? What adaptations did you learn to make? And if more comes to you, just narrow it down to one. Now think about it. How did you carry forward the adaptations you made during childhood into adulthood? And how might these adaptations now be causing distress in your adult life, in your personal life, in your professional life? And I would like to close this with a thought. people are not defined by their behaviors. Their behaviors are just patterns that at one time served them to feel safe. So thank you for watching and of course participating in this little exercise if you did. I hope it was a contribution to you and that you share my excitement in implementing all this that I just learned last week in my first 20 hours of joining complex trauma, developmental trauma training into my practice, and this will help me serve my clients better. And this is my motivation and it gives me purpose. So thank you for being here. I hope to see you next time. Love, Zsuzsa.